Hi, everyone. So we've heard a lot today about volumetric experiences, and we've seen, like with Felix and Paul, for instance, that they're moving from 360 into 6 degree of freedom content. So I would like to give you the overview about those volumetric experiences, how we make them photorealistic, kind of the process behind that and the future of that, and then what storytelling techniques this allows us to bring into play when we're talking about volumetric experiences in a room scale virtual reality experience. So I want to start off by stating that in every new medium there's new technology, and that new technology is almost never photorealistic itself. It takes many decades of artists and engineers working together, collaborating to really push the photorealism forward. So here you see a photo from Vol Libre, which was from 1980 and was originally made by some of the engineers behind Lucasfilm and Pixar. It was one of the first landscapes really trying to get at photorealism with the technology of animation at the time. If you have the time later, I highly recommend watching this video. Now, in virtual reality, this is, of course, only in the absolute earliest days of volumetric capture. The reason is that we need to take sometimes hundreds or thousands of photos in a space to capture this from any single angle that we want. So you can bend down, you can see it from underneath, you can stand up, see it from on top. You need to get these pictures from all angles. Then you need to take a lot of manual labor to actually put all of these photos together and make sure that they're seamless. All the manual labor has, of course, left photogrammetry and volumetric capture only at the price point that really Hollywood can afford so far. It's not really brought down into our aspects. So we have to find out ways to get around this, right? So the industry has, of course, turned to 360 film as the first way to get around the volumetric expense while still creating good photorealistic content. The wonderful thing about 360 film is that it's easy for most studios to get into it. You need to buy one camera, correct? Sometimes a drone to make it steady and a beautiful shot, but also the production units. It's quite similar to a traditional film production sequence. You need to film and then edit it, and you can launch. And it's very easy for storytellers and directors to get into 360 content. But all of the content that has been created for this is, of course, allowing us to experiment with different use cases of 360 technology, and it's also allowing us to find the limitations. And so those limitations are what I'd like to mention, which is solely one, that people do sometimes get sick, which is affecting our distribution numbers. On an almost daily basis now when I do demos, I have to explain to someone, no, don't worry, you're not gonna get sick when you use this. We're in a volumetric experience. So the reason for that is that your visual input most of the time has some motion to it, but you might be sitting down, so your body is expecting physical forces, which it doesn't receive. So this can create some issues in certain people. And the other issue is the framing. Framing in traditional storytelling has always been used as a technique in and of itself. But once we talk about having a 360 photo, this is removed from the equation. You, as a viewer, can look anywhere, and so directors are pretty unsure and only now starting to figure out how we draw attention to one specific spot versus another within the experience. So all limitations, but of course there are certain use cases that we found where you can get around these. Now, when we're talking about something in natural navigation, so when we're talking about an explorable, photogrammatic, photorealistic environment, really, the person can actually move around. So this negates the point of the sickness, because every visual change that's happening in the scene, in the glasses, is something that you've exerted yourself. You've told it you need to teleport. You've bent down. So your body is actually feeling these physical forces. So it's not too much of a problem. And then the other thing is that with framing, yeah, framing is no longer, it's still an issue, right? The individual can still look anywhere, they can still walk around. But even though we've lost this one technique of storytelling, we have added so many more because this person can interact with their environment. And so these stories can come across in a whole new way that directors and writers might have never thought about previously. And so I'd like to talk about how we're making this readily available in photorealistic quality. Because right now, we can only do these things within a kind of CGI space, right? When we talk about 6 degrees of freedom in the real world, we need to bring in photogrammetry. And so this is what Realities.io, a Berlin-based startup, is actually working on. So we're making breakthroughs in the computer vision technology needed to bring about photogrammetry at a price point that independent content creators journalists, documentary filmmakers, and cultural institutions can start to afford. This is no longer a $10 million process, it's now a $150,000 process. And so it's a lot more beneficial for you to get into the 6 degree of freedom realm. So we'd like to talk about, Okay, my next slide is not even working. I think it's the irony of the tech industry that we can never get presentations working, but we can teleport you to other spaces. So in all of these presentations, just keep that in mind. So we have been challenged by different partners, who the previous slide was actually giving the different titles of the partners that we've been working with. But individual content creators have been coming to us and approaching us with different technological challenges for us to improve our computer vision software. So these are some photos from the Haus. So the Haus, if anyone is from Berlin and knows, it was an abandoned bank out in Kudamm here in Berlin that last year was turned into an urban art labyrinth by the street artists of Berlin. 165 street art teams from around the world got together into this space and decked it out in artwork. So this was a real physical space that was here. The one on the top corner, for instance, was a bunch of newspaper articles stapled all around the walls versus all of the graffiti that was drawn, or the feet exhibition. So this was open to the public for 2 months, of which time there were wait times over 7 hours. And then after that 2 months, it was closed and destroyed. And of course, in the gentrification of Berlin, there are now condos where this building used to be. But the nice thing was that using photogrammetry, Realities.io was able to go in there and scan the entire space, preserving it forever in virtual reality. And so now we have this new storytelling technique when we're talking about photorealistic spaces, where we can take people back in time and show them a space as it used to be, or a space that doesn't exist anymore. So we can start to tell those stories in an educative way that's never been there before. Another thing that we're doing with this is working with the idea of a nonlinear storyline. So by using the holograms of the artists themselves, when you walk around this space, you get to meet each artist. You get to hear the story of how they created that space and hear the really awesome times that they had when 165 artists were all living in the same space. And so you can really get that essence from them at a storyline that's driven by the viewer themselves, which is something that you could very rarely do in traditional film. The last thing that we've learned from the Haus, which was pretty much the biggest technical challenge that we've had, is the sheer scope. So something that you're starting to see in volumetric experiences that are coming out is the sheer size of these spaces. We find that when you're putting someone into a space that is so large that they feel like they're overwhelmed by the amount of possibilities that they can do, this adds to the immersion to a level that very few other mediums can actually have. You have a lot of choices. You are there yourself. And so the Haus is a perfect example of this because it was 10,000 square meters of the entire space. And so we were able to capture all 10,000 square meters. And now when you walk around it and you're there, it really is overwhelming. It's an experience where you have to come back. You go for 15, 20 minutes, you leave, you come back for 20 minutes, explore another floor, and learn more about it. And because of this, it does create a problem. These file sizes for these large volumetric experiences can get immense. This can be up to 50 gigabytes for just the Haus because it's 10,000 square meters. And so with all these volumetric experiences, we of course need to do location-based settings. So the Haus, for instance, is one that we are looking to distribute and looking for a partner to bring it out to the public with. But nonetheless, it does increase the immersion by a lot, and we find very great results with it. Another project, another partner that came to us was Now Here Media. They are here today, so if you'd like to speak with them about this experience, you're more than welcome to. Now Here Media came to us because of the idea that we firmly believe about photorealistic virtual reality, which is that these experiences are best served when we scan spaces that are out of reach to the public. If you go to a space that is completely available to the public to go to, you're going to have a quality offshoot, right? No matter what in virtual reality, it's never going to be exactly the same. And so we want to make sure that you are taken to spaces that you would otherwise never be able to access. And so one of these is in Iraq, where Now Here Media has recently traveled to. They went there in order to scan a house that was abandoned by ISIS and possibly booby-trapped by them as they were retreating. And families went back home. And so the idea of this is to bring awareness to these booby traps that ISIS is leaving. However, in good storytelling, they waited until they really got to Iraq in order to find what the story would be. And when they were there, they reached on something which really brings to the emotional immersion that is possible when you're in a real space. So the story is, you can walk into this house now with a man who invites you in. Once you're in his house, you can walk around, you can be there, you can turn on the lights, you can have a cup of tea with him essentially, and hear his stories of how his 2 sons just walked down the street to get some supplies and were blown up in a booby trap and died. And so this is really a super powerful story about loss and mourning, and how the setting itself adds so much to that immersion within that story. When you're there in his house hearing his stories, it's in a sense so much more real than if you were in a CGI space or you were just sitting there in a 360 video. Being able to interact is an extremely important element that Walk With Me, which is the title of this experience, is going to be providing. And then the last storytelling technique that we'd like to talk about has been touched upon very much by the congregation, by other speakers here today, which is releasing companion pieces, which we firmly also believe is a key to distribution of these titles. This is a group that we worked with in Northern Canada, so to highlight Canada. These are a British Columbia documentary group that is producing a nature documentary about the Northern Arctic of British Columbia. And along with their production, when they were filming the main film, we taught them how to do photogrammetry. We did this remotely by just Skyping with them and giving them the ideas. And then they went and scanned a few glaciers and caves in the Northern Arctic, which we are able to bring to you. So now you can go there and see these regions that you otherwise would never be able to witness. And so thus far, we've heard about how this cross-media content helps with marketing for the different ideas. But I'd like to bring a different perspective on that, which is that there's this fundamental rule of design where you only change one thing at a time for someone. When you change one thing at a time, it's not too overwhelming for the person. They can kind of understand what's going on. And so when people are getting into virtual reality for the first time, there's already this essence of putting on the headset is already a very new thing, and that can be overwhelming because it's not just a new design element that they're seeing, they're wearing something. You feel this on your head, you might be tethered, so it does create those problems. But when you put it on and you're brought to a space that you're expecting, a space that you've seen before, and a space that you've been longing to see, that stress that was just endured within you from putting on the headset is really reduced by a lot. And so you get this warm, familiar sense that this cross-media content really allows, and that's kind of the benefit for marketing for the most part. So here you've heard now 4 different storytelling techniques that we like to use. And we'd like to hear from all of you actually about what types of storytelling techniques you would like to have for different documentary or nonfiction pieces that are in real photorealistic quality. And when I say real photorealistic quality, I mean everything is one-to-one scale. Everything is exactly how you would see it when you're actually in that space. So you can look at every nook and cranny, see the cracks in the glaciers, have fun trying to jump over them, and not die because of your mental capacity. So I do that. I can't jump over the cracks in the glacier for anything. So we would like to hear all the different ways that you guys would like to build into these experiences. So please let us know, because we want to make that come true for all of you.
I think we've got 2 minutes for Q&A. Do you have questions? Come on, there must be something.
Anything about photogrammetry or about 6 degrees of freedom experiences?
Yes, there is one. Mr. Lane.
Hiya.
Hi.
I think the photogrammetry stuff is really amazing when you're in it, but one of the things that I've noticed comparing it to a highly interactive thing like something like the one where you're in the kitchen trying to do all the stuff around, is that the immersion you get from being in a full 3D space is phenomenal, but then very quickly people try and touch stuff. Mm-hmm. How much are you able to introduce elements of interactivity to sort of keep the feeling of presence in the photogrammetry scenes?
that is what we're working on with partners, is to see what types of interactivity we want to build into it, and then working on how we include those. So the level is constantly changing, right? We're constantly adding to it every time someone comes to us with new ideas, and that's part of the reason why we have these partnerships. It's just that they will come with those new ideas, yeah. But it's very flexible, so I can't entirely answer that. Maybe Daniel, our co-founder who's sitting next to you, will be able to answer it more if you want to hand over the microphone. But yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.